Ivan, thank you so much for
allowing
me to come to Connecticut, to come into your home and sit down and kind of share your journey and the gravitational pull of sports to you. I greatly appreciate it. I just have to ask, though, you're from Mobile, Alabama. How'd you end up in Connecticut?
Married
Southern boy.
Married a Yankee. Yeah, we met in New York when I was a fact checker, and I got a job in Dallas. And she came down with me, and she liked Dallas. And finally, after we'd been there 6 years, she said, "I want to move back east." And I said, "I don't." and Meg looked at me and said, "Well, you're not home. I'm the one who's home." And I went, "Oh God, she's smart." Yeah,
she's right.
Yeah, I had no answer for that. And so we moved back up. Yeah, we've been in Fairfield for 20 something years. Yeah.
Well, then what was it like, though, then growing up in Mobile, Alabama, in the Maisel household, and how that gravitational pull to sports, how did it affect your family and how you got into sports?
Well, I was a kid that just glommed onto sports at a very early age. I literally learned to reading the sporting news. We had a woman who worked for us named Rosalie Caldwell who would read the sporting news, and she would bring it every Saturday to the house, and I would sit on her lap and read it. And it kind of germinated from there. My father had been a high school basketball coach before I was born. So he was an Alabama graduate, and that was the heyday of Bear Bryant. So that was a big deal in our house. Whatever sport it was, the Braves moved to Atlanta when I was in first grade or in kindergarten. And so that became a big obsession, and it just, it went from there.
Yeah.
I just, loved it.
And was there a particular sport that you loved more?
I loved college football, and I loved baseball. And I grew up thinking that, and you would appreciate this, having grown up in Atlanta, I was going to replace Milo Hamilton as the Braves play-by-play announcer.
Okay, yes.
And actually, when I got out of college, when I was a fact checker at Sports Illustrated, I was assigned to baseball as I wanted. And I really didn't like it.
And why not?
I didn't like the people all that much in the sport. It was when the big money was just beginning to hit baseball, and I found that the athletes didn't really need the media the way that they used to, and it was such a confrontational atmosphere in the locker room with the writers in general. And it's not that it's confrontational, it's that I think baseball, as are a lot of sports, it's a very clubby thing, and until you're accepted, and I was a kid and trying to find my way. And it was actually a little easier for me because I was from Sports Illustrated, so I had some credibility that I didn't really deserve. But I just didn't like. I liked college sports a lot better. I thought the coaches were. College coaches, as you would know, are mentors in a lot of ways to young people, and they're teachers, and I really, and leaders, so I like talking to them, and when I was that age, when I broke into the business, the kids who were playing, I could relate to, and I sort of looked at the coaches as authority figures. And then the longer I did it, I related to the coaches because we were the same age. and then I got older, and the kids were the age of my kids, so I could talk to them in a way that I hadn't before. So it just has kind of fit my life better.
And you mentioned, being accepted into the club, so to speak, especially from a writer standpoint with some of these athletes. And is it a time situation in terms of being accepted into the club, as far as they have to see you around so much, or is it somewhat also like what type of articles you're writing or what type of stories you're writing, or a combination?
Yeah, I think it was more, baseball is a day-to-day job, and the daily beat guys get accepted because they're there every day. Sports Illustrated, we weren't there every day. We weren't in the same locker room every day, but we were accepted because we were Sports Illustrated. And I met some players that I really enjoyed covering, and I met some managers that, you know, I got along with. And, you know, it wasn't always as, you know, adversarial or uncomfortable as I'm painting it, but it just, I had this vision in my head of I would just fall in love with it, and I didn't. And I was, when you start out, back in the day, when you started out as a fact checker at Sports Illustrated, you wrote on your time. And so I was and I just was in there I was in there 7 days a week and learning, but at some point I wasn't good enough to be a writer at Sports Illustrated at that time. And I needed to go get a job where I could write every day. And so I left for a newspaper. I'd been there 5 years, in 5.5 years, and I left to get a newspaper job.
And so you were with Sports Illustrated as a fact checker for 5 years.
Yes, I was there. Now, that was not my first job. My first job, you would appreciate this, was in Atlanta. This was before the newspaper merger, at the Constitution.
Oh, yes.
And they hired me straight out of college. I was 21 years old. They didn't want to give me anything important because I was 21 years old. And so they gave me, because it's Atlanta, they gave me Clemson and South Carolina to cover, because there's a lot of alums in the Atlanta area, as you might imagine.
Yes.
And that was 1981. And Clemson never lost. And about the first week in November, they were getting ready to play a big game against North Carolina. And it dawned on them that they had a really hot story, and they had this 21-year-old dumbass covering it, if I can say that on your podcast, because it's true.
You can.
Yeah, and so then they took one of the older guys, and he would come do the game stories on the week, and I would cover on the weekend. I would cover Clemson during the week and write a sidebar on Saturday, and I was fine with that because I was so over my head. But I always say to Danny Ford when I see him, you know, I covered you when you were dark-headed and skinny, Danny.
That's right. Well, it comes full circle now that we're sitting down together shortly after Clemson wins their third national championship.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And I'm sure you're gobsmacked, but just the change and you know, I heard people sort of mocking Dabo a little bit Monday night, talking about little old Clemson. Well, if you know Clemson and you have any historical perspective about Clemson, you understand where he was coming from.
That's right. Yeah. It is little old Clemson.
Yeah, it's not anymore.
No, it's not.
But it is. Yeah.
Without a doubt. Mm-hmm. So now, how did you get from Alabama to Stanford before you moved to Atlanta with your first job? Again, you're all over the country.
Yeah. Well, I was good in school. The Ivy League intimidated me. The New England weather intimidated me. I would never live in New England.
Well, you are now.
Yeah, for nearly 25 years. But when I was 17 years old, I certainly wouldn't. And I didn't want to watch Ivy League football. That I thought, oh, that's not important. And somebody said to me as a senior in high school, and I don't remember whom, well, you should look at Stanford. That's a good school. And the immediate thought I had was, well, they're in the Pac-8. I could watch that for 4 years. Okay. Yeah. And that,
and that was it.
That was it. I applied, and, you know, they were, I'm sure, fainted because somebody from Alabama applied. And Stanford loves to have kids from all 50 states. I'm just not sure the bar was quite as high for me, having gone to Murphy High in Mobile as it might have been for others. But there were 2 kids in my freshman class from Alabama. The other was a women's basketball player from Montgomery. So, and then I think over the course of my 4 years, there were a total of 6 Alabama kids.
That's not many.
No. So the first, I'd say, Rich, about the first 6 weeks I was in school, I had to repeat everything I said because they couldn't understand me.
I believe it.
Yeah.
With a southern drawl, I imagine you did have it.
Your name's Arvin? No, it's Ivan. What? Yeah. No, I had to learn to go Ivan. Oh, okay. So.
Were you ever homesick?
Oh, yeah. Sure. I think I probably would have been homesick anywhere. I tell this story. My mother didn't want me to go that far away, and my father just looked at her and said, "Well," because he knew I wanted to go, and he this was just so my dad. He just looked at my mom and said, "Well, if it's too far for him to drive, what do you care how long he's on the plane?" and so I was like, "Wow, that was good." Yeah.
That's profound.
Yeah,
right?
So it was true. So I would. I went home I went home. I was lucky. I'd go home when I needed to.
And before you get to Stanford, though, had you already had it in your mind? Now, you might not be the play-by-play guy for the Atlanta Braves, but you wanted to be a sports writer?
Well, I had a English teacher my senior year. His name was Ruth Welburn, and she gave me confidence that I could write. And I would write stuff, and she was so enthusiastic and so encouraging, and so I thought, well, hey, I know I can do this. Is something I might be able to do. And first week I was on campus, I walked into the Stanford Daily and presented myself and just started writing. First week or 2 I was there, I was interviewing the head coach, who was this guy. I'd never heard of him. He was brand new there, his first year. I didn't know who he was from third base. His name was Bill Walsh. And,
that's a known name now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He did okay. And it was funny. Of course he didn't remember me, but our paths crossed again when he went back to Stanford in the 90s, and he got a real kick out of me telling him, my memories of those meetings. And he was a terrific guy.
Now, were you at Stanford for the infamous Stanford-Cal game?
I was in the stands. I had graduated the year before, but I had gone back. I was, as soon as the baseball season ended, my first season at Sports Illustrated, 1982, I went out just to decompress and hang with my buddies and go to big game.
Yes.
And so, I was in the stands.
You were in the stands. So what was that like?
Well, the memory I have is we were sitting on the side where the final touchdown was played, in the end zone on the other side, because it was on the right side of the end zone. And I just remember this sort of chaos and thinking, well, surely, they're not going to say that was a touchdown. And all my Stanford buddies are cheering, and I'm just sitting there going, they're not saying game's over yet. And the officials were huddling, and my best friend I'm sitting next to, he's screaming, yelling, and I'm just going, this isn't good. It's not good. This is not good. This is not good. And then, the white hat gives it one of those, and you could just see the fans below the press box just sort of, it was like a wave that just sort of spilled onto the field and just went delirious. And I remember walking back to wherever we parked, and the Cal fans being really sort of sympathetic. We don't really understand that or what happened.
I don't know how it happened.
You guys, so it was really and that's sort of the nature, in my experience, of the Stanford-Cal rivalry. It's not a bloodlust the way it is where we grew up, but that was a real stroke of good fortune. And at that time, you don't really know whether people around the country would understand what had happened. You're thinking, how big of an impact would this make? And the next morning, since it was the West Coast, I turned on NFL Today just to see if they said anything, and Brent Musburger led with it. And I went,
yes.
Okay, they get it.
It's a big deal.
It's a big deal, yeah.
Arguably the greatest finish in college football history.
Yeah, I mean, and I covered the kick six, so I was there for that. I was in the press box when Cordell Stewart threw his pass.
So you've seen some crazy
That's about
finishes.
the top 3 crazy finishes, yeah.
Now, have you ever gone back and really watched the end of that Stanford Cal game and said, all right, that play's not legal?
You mean studied it like the Zapruder film?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Meg, my wife, just refers to it as his knee was down, because every time we watch it, I go, his knee was down.
Exactly.
And somebody did a really, I wish I could remember who, somebody did a terrific documentary on the play a few years ago. And John Elway, who, did not get to play in a bowl game because of that call, he just smiled. He says, if we had won that game, nobody would remember it. So he said, I'm good with it. Yeah.
At least it's memorable, I guess, from that standpoint. What other memories do you have from your early days of you becoming a writer, and almost when did you feel that you were more of a storyteller than just a writer?
It's a good question. It took me a long time to figure out that that's what, I had a sense that was it, because I came from a family of storytellers. I have memories of, as a child, at whatever Jewish holiday or Thanksgiving, where my dad and his siblings would get together, and they were a family of storytellers. So after the meal, everybody would sit around the table and they'd start talking about growing up in Mobile. And I was just riveted by that. And my dad was a terrific storyteller. And so I always I think that's a lot of what ability I have came from genetically. Or,
it's part of your DNA.
Yeah. Figuratively and literally, yeah. And then it just was learning how to get that onto the page. And that took me, I feel like it took me a long time. I mean, I did it for a long time before I felt like I was comfortable with my voice. I used to really sweat over it. And now I can kind of look at it and go, okay, that's the story I want to tell. And I do it. But I'm done.
So how do you choose the story that you want to tell?
Just what looks interesting to me, or how I can relate it to something, that I've seen before, or place it in perspective. I mean, if I really get stuck, and I tell this to kids who ask me about it, if I really get stuck about what to write, I think, well, if I were going to call my brother and tell him what happened in this game, what's the first thing I would tell him? Because he thinks the same way I think, and we have a great relationship, and he's a huge sports fan, and so I kind of, okay, let's see if I can make that work, and I build on that.
And so what's your process then? I mean, what's your routine when you're getting ready to write a story in terms of research, or you have a certain spot you go to start writing?
Well, I have a wall of books upstairs that I've collected over 30 plus years of covering college football. And, if it's a historical piece, I just, pluck them off the wall and start doing that. And now that I'm working on this 150th anniversary of college football project, that's all I've been doing is, had my nose in my books. After that, it's just sort of the knowledge of having done this since 1987, and knowing whom to call, and knowing that they'll return my call, which doesn't always happen, but it happens more than it used to. And
I imagine it's easier that they return your call now than it was when you first started.
Well, it's funny that you say that. because I got hired to cover college football by the Dallas Morning News in 1987. And coaches always called me back, and they didn't know me, from Adam. But as I came to learn, I was really lucky to get that job, because the Morning News covered more college football than any paper in the country. And with all the talent in Dallas, coaches wanted their name in the Dallas Morning News. So whoever I needed, I got, 9 times out of 10. So it was, that was a really lucky stroke that Dave Smith hired me.
And what other mentors did you have that helped you, kind of be able to spread your wings and, help you with your writing and storytelling?
There was a writer at Sports Illustrated when I was a fact-checking editor named Ron Femright, who was just terrific. He was a wonderful man. He was a bon vivant kind of guy. He just couldn't have been nicer. And his copy was so clean you could eat off of it.
And what do you mean clean?
Just it was, it didn't need to be copy edited. The story was exactly, as he wrote it, didn't need to be edited. Everything was in the order it needed to be in. The grammar was good. There were no typos. This was in the day before computers. And it was just pristine. And, another of my mentors was an editor at Sports Illustrated named Walter Bingham. And Walt used to say to me, I read Ron's stories and I just want to change the word large to big so the editors above me will know I read it. Yeah.
So I can say, at least I did one thing. I did my job.
So Ron was just he was just a terrific man. He died a few years ago. He meant a lot to me. And Dan Jenkins, Dan was and is and remains a legend in sports writing, and his first love was college football, maybe second behind golf. But Sally, his daughter, who is a columnist at the Washington Post, and I went to college together, so I knew Dan as a college kid and always kept in touch with him and still keep in touch with him. And he's still loves college football. He still follows it, religiously. And, so he was a mentor and somebody for me to look up to.
And when you look at your stories, what makes it a successful story, or how do you define success in terms of, oh, that's a good piece, that's a good story? Because in sports, we can define it, win or a loss. That's
why I cover sports.
Yeah,
because I loved as a kid and still have a great interest in politics, but I didn't want to cover politics because it's really hard at the end of the day to figure out. It just keeps going. The arguments never stop, and in sports they stop.
That's right.
And you just say, well, yeah, they won. I don't know. Ask me that question again.
Yeah. In terms of when you write a story,
how do I know it's good?
How do you know it's good? Yeah. How do you define that it's a successful story?
I'm pretty hard on myself. I don't say that a whole lot. I think most writers, I'm not going to speak for most writers. I have this sort of rhythm in my head and if the story, comes out by that rhythm, then
it feels right.
And it feels right, and if it's accurate, if I hadn't made any mistakes, then I'm okay with it, and I can. I write a lot more conversationally than I used to, which I think is partly because of the way things have changed by writing on the internet. I think it's partly age and comfort with my own voice. But there's just sort of I can just hear it in my ear, whether it's working or not.
And does it usually come out pretty, does it flow out when you start writing?
Everything I've ever written has flowed. No. Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. No, obviously, they vary. Sometimes you just see it right away.
And so this writer's block, is it real?
Yeah. To me, it's not so much writer's block. It's maintaining your focus. If I'm focused and there's, my distractions are at a minimum, if I've hidden this, then I don't get blocked. And sometimes if I am blocked, I'll think, well, I don't know what my lead is yet, but I know I'm going to write this. I know this is going to be a part of the story. So I'll just write a chunk of something. And I get that on the screen, and then I go, okay, all right, so you've got that in place, and then I find something else. And that's not how they teach you to do it in journalism school, and I don't know that I would recommend it. You're supposed to write an outline and then follow your outline, and probably to my detriment, I don't do that enough. And it's probably harder to do it the way I do it, I guess. But I never quite had the self-discipline to do it the right way.
And what about your relationship with copy editors? Is it contentious at times? Like, hey, no, I don't. Yeah. I like the flow of this. I like the framework of this.
How dare you?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I've never had never is a strong word. Having come up at Sports Illustrated in a very heavily edited organ, a magazine by definition is an editor's organ because they're the ones controlling it more so than a writer sending it in to a newspaper on deadline. I never had trouble with being edited. I might have trouble with individual edits, but I always understood, and I was never that arrogant to think that everything I wrote was
was perfect.
Came on a stone tablet. Now I do bristle, and it's why I left Sports Illustrated not once but twice. I do bristle at when somebody who wasn't there and knows more about the story than I who was there. But by and large, I'm okay with being edited.
And so what was the appeal then to leave Sports Illustrated to ESPN, though? Because I imagine you could have done so many different things.
Well, it's nice of you to say that, but this was 2002, and the print world was beginning to wobble a little bit. And Sports Illustrated was beginning to wobble a little bit. And I thought about going back to newspaper, but it would have been a significant pay cut. And ESPN approached me in the summer of 2002. And this is how long ago this was, Rich. We're thinking of hiring a college football writer.
Just one.
Yeah, because at that time, ESPN.com began in 1995. And so people weren't really going to the internet for their news yet. We're thinking of hiring a college football writer. Would you be interested? And I thought, well, I don't know about the whole idea of the internet working, but I know ESPN's not going anywhere. So
you could see that.
Yeah. And maybe this will be, I can use this as a platform by which to do television or to do, and so I took the leap, and it was, really lucky. That was 16 years ago. And as we've seen, the print world is just,
it is changing.
Much less healthy than it was in 2002. And we sort of became the go-to place for college football coverage.
And how has social media changed anything that you do?
Well, if you would ask my daughters, they would tell you I'm not very good at it. They keep saying to me, Dad, you need to be on Instagram. And I keep saying, I don't think in photographs. I think in words. And they roll their eyes. And, Twitter is, I don't love Twitter. We've all kind of figured out what Twitter's good at and what it's not, what it's good for and what it's not good for. And I use it to just sort of try to keep up, and I will, put my stories out via Twitter, and occasionally I will tweet about games or something in the news. I do it a lot less than I used to because it's just such a unpleasant place to be by and large,
Unfortunately, there's a lot of negativity.
Yeah, and so I have pared back what I do on it. And I go on Facebook religiously 3 or 4 times a year. And really, I decided that professionally, I really wasn't that interested in using Facebook, and I go on now to kind of see my, nieces and nephews, children, and check in on my high school friends, and that's about what I use it for.
And you mentioned TV or radio or whatever, being a play-by-play guy. You've got the voice.
Yeah,
you have got the voice.
Well, I never went into radio. I liked writing more.
And why is that?
I like telling stories, and I like telling people, we all like to tell people something they don't know. And hey, guess what I saw? Hey, check this out. Hey, did you know this? I mean, that's the essence of what we do. And that's a lot of fun for me. And it's still a lot of fun for me. My favorite thing about doing this College Football 150 project is there's so many great historical stories that people today don't know or don't know much about. And it's just this trove of, hey, did you know this? Hey, this is a really cool story. Sit down and I'll tell it to you. So that I'm having a lot of fun with that.
So explain a little bit more about that, because I know it's not going to be launched until September, or the first portion of it.
The video stuff will not come out. And what we're going to do, Rich, is beginning in late August, I think, there will be 150 consecutive days of content on ESPN of something. We have 35 hours of original programming. There'll be two 11-week series that will run beginning from September to December about the history of the game. One is called The American Game, and one is called The Greatest. There will be 2 documentaries. One will run at the beginning of the year, one at the end of the year, called Football Is Us. We'll have something called My Story, which will be 150 60-second vignettes from people in the game, former players, coaches, media people, fans who have a story to tell that, nobody knows. And, and then the content I'm going to do a series of 8 historical podcasts called Down and Distance that we will drop in August. I'm working on now. And then online on ESPN.com, we'll have content all year long. I wrote the first week of January, I wrote a Welcome to 150 essay about the game and its place in history, in American history. So, and each month until August, we'll have at least one big historical piece about the game. And then during the season, we'll have more than, probably more like one a week.
And why do you think that people just love college football so much, to the point where we were celebrating 150 years of the game in such a big way like this, to have its own organization? I mean, it's just amazing. Why do you think that is?
I think there's some connection that people make with their school. Either they went there or it represents their state. And there's an emotional connection there that no other sport has. Some of it is because of the age you are when you go to college, and that's when you are making your mark as your own person. You're not your parents' child anymore. You think you're an adult anyway.
That's right.
Yeah.
You think you know it all.
Yeah, of course. And if you think about it, and I've thought about this a lot in the context of this project, the friends you make when you are in college are your lifelong friends, and they know you better than anybody knows you. And really, how much time did you spend with them? Some 1 year, some 4 years. And yet you can pick up the phone and you can call them and you pick up right up where you left off the last time you talked. And in turn, if you think about what the people you've met in the last 4 years as an adult, there's, it's nothing like that.
That's right.
So there's something about the imprint of your college life that fuels that passion you have for your team. And it may have started earlier in that. If you grew up in a household where that team was revered because your parents went to that school, then you come into that passion that way. But people are certainly more passionate about college sports than they are about professional sports. The SEC takes a lot of heat for how they do things from around the country, but their slogan, their current slogan of "It means more" is absolutely right. And college sports do mean more. And I think that connection is why we're doing what we're doing with 150.
I think it's just amazing that it's such a big project like it is. So how did you get involved? Well, other than the fact that we know you're one of the most renowned college football writers out there, right?
Well, it's funny. I had it in the back of my head for a while that, 2019, 150. And I emailed 5 years ago, I emailed John Skipper, who was then the head of ESPN, and just said, hey, 2019, 150th anniversary of college football, when do you want me to start bugging you about this? And he wrote back and said, 3 years out. He said, great idea. And, come back to me in 2016. Well, what I didn't know, John Dahl, who is the executive producer of 30 for 30 Films, had right around that time and probably a little before me, was doing a documentary on the Mannings, a 30 for 30 on the Mannings, and he had seen Archie Manning playing for Ole Miss in 1969 and seen the 100 sticker on his helmet. And he thought, what in God's name is that? And so he looked it up and saw it was the centennial, and he got the bug in his head that way. So 3 years ago, John and I found one another within the company. Somebody said to me, hey, John Dahl's talking about 150. You should go talk to him. And so we've went with Rob Temple in sales. The three of us would meet and have lunch and start to plan this. And it got bigger and bigger. And luckily, the powers that be at ESPN bought into our project and our ideas, and off we went.
And how much are you enjoying the podcasting side of the project versus the writing side?
Well, I'm enjoying it. I am learning that writing a podcast script is different than writing a story, but that's fun. I'm learning something new. But no, it's been good. We are, we're developing the scripts right now, and so unfortunately, it means that when I write a story and want to turn it into a pod script, I have to turn around and write it again in a completely different form. So I thought it wouldn't be twice as much work, and it's turning out to be twice as much work, but it's still fun.
Yeah. And now, why didn't you move to Bristol when you started working for ESPN?
Because I didn't have to. And it's nothing about Bristol, but we've been in this house since 1995, and I've had 3 jobs in this house, ESPN's got writers all over the country, and they didn't care, and I didn't have to be in the office every day, and I don't want to be in the office every day. As much as I traveled, the fact that when I was home, when I wasn't traveling, I was in the house working, and the kids came home from school, and I could be here, and I could run them places if I needed to run them. For a parent that travels a lot, that was invaluable, and luckily, ESPN was cool with it.
Yeah. And throughout your whole career, the long career writing, have you ever tried to calculate how many words you've ever written throughout your career?
Wow. No, I do know that I'm over 1,400 Marriott nights and
that's
nearing
a lot.
3 million miles on Delta. So, so that's, and you throw in the other hotels, I've probably spent, 5 years on the road, maybe 5 years, which sports writers, that's what you do.
I mean, that's part of the grind.
Especially if you live in Connecticut and want to cover college football.
That's right.
Yeah.
You got to be traveling.
To the Huskies.
That's right. Yeah. Another thing that you did share publicly was the death of your son, Max, several years ago. And I don't have something, I have something in common with you regarding that. I didn't lose a child, but my brother was shot and killed 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I understand, just the harshness of a pain like that. How has his death affected your writing, though?
Well, that's a good question. I think I have a much broader perspective now. Mm-hmm. I realize that the games aren't as important to me, and then part of that may be age, but I think part of it is, you really kind of, you learn what's important in a way that you wish you never had. So I think I'm a little softer in how I do a story, and I have a little more empathy than maybe I had before for people and what they're going through. And I'm a little more interested. I would put it this way, I'm not as focused on the newsy story and, I got to get this, I got to be first, I got to write this piece because that's what's happening. I'd rather just sort of find a good story and tell it.
Yeah. And I did also read that when you were reflecting not too long ago you made a comment that through his death, you've learned that you can't be anchored somewhere. What did you mean by that?
Well, the point I was trying to make with that, Rich, is that, you want to stay where Max is, because that's your only chance to be with him. But you can't do that. Your life keeps going on. And at some point, and he wouldn't want us to do it this way. You got to keep living your life. And so you just learn that you can't be anchored where Max was. Mm-hmm. You just have to carry that grief with you wherever you go. And it's feels a little harsh to pull away like that, but what choice do you have, really? Mm-hmm. Tyler Trent, shortly before he died, the kid at Purdue, mm-hmm. that we all fell in love with last year, wrote a column for the Indianapolis Star that I just loved, and I didn't read it until after he died. And he said basically, and he wanted to be a sports writer, and so he could write. He said, "I'm in hospice now, but really, when you think about it, we're all in hospice. We're all, we are all going to die.
That's right.
So you have to live your life with that in mind, and that's a powerful thought, and one that people avoid like the plague, but it's the truth. And,
it is.
Yeah, and you just, it sort of centers you in a way that perhaps, certainly I wasn't centered before.
And have you thought about like when it would be a point in terms of your career that you would be done? Or will you ever stop writing?
Well, I don't know that I'll ever stop writing because I enjoy it. Whether I would do it, I love what I'm doing. I'm in my 17th year at ESPN. I serve at the pleasure of the king. I mean, my contract it's got a little bit more to go on it, but I don't see myself leaving soon. I do see myself leaving because it's a young person's business, and I've beaten the odds by making it this far. Really, if I look around in a press box, and there aren't very many people my age, there's a couple. But I'm trying to figure out what I would do, down the road. I'm going to teach a class this winter in continuing studies, adult learning, at Stanford on the history of college football, because I got it all here. I mean, we've been planning it for 3 years.
I need to attend that class.
Come on. I don't know how you'd be able to pull that off.
That's right.
Yeah. So that'll be, we'll see if I like that. I don't know. And adult learning it's not being a professor of kids, but I'll just see how I like that and go from there
and see how it flows.
Yeah.
And through all the words that you've written, one of the things I like to focus on is words of wisdom. So what words of wisdom has meant a lot to you that you would like to share? And it could be phrases, quotes, or mottos, or just life advice.
Well, if I have become wiser in the last few years, it's because of losing Max. It's the running joke we've said is that Max gave us that gift, and really on the whole I would have rather had a dozen golf balls.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's just to listen to people, and especially regarding mental health, don't be scared to reach out to someone, and don't be scared if you think you're struggling, because there's such a stigma. Historically, there's been a stigma with mental health, and there really shouldn't be. It's an illness. It's no different in its ability to devastate than cancer, except in the sense that people refuse to admit it a lot of times. And we all need to sort of, as the rate of suicide has increased, we all need to rethink that and how we view mental health and what we can do to help.
Agreed 100%.
Yeah.
And Ivan, I can't thank you enough for allowing me to steal some of your time today.
I'm flattered.
Greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, I've been, who wouldn't want to talk about themselves ad nauseum?
And we get to talk college football and sports.
Yes.
So.
Oh, yeah, that
right?
too. Yeah.
Ivan, thank you so much.
You bet.